You're listening to episode 95 of the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Berrion Berry about how to use cycle syncing to optimize your entrepreneurial flow. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, a registered dietitian, nutrition business coach, and online entrepreneur with over 10 years of experience in online business. And I'm here to show you everything I've learned about creating a life and a business that nourishes you. On this podcast, we'll talk about the lifestyle habits, practical strategies, mindset shifts, and leaps of faith required to build a healthy body, a powerful mind, a strong spirit, and a successful business. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm Laura Schoenfeld, your host, and we have a really cool episode for you today. So I'm just going to jump straight into the introduction so we can get to the juicy stuff. Today's guest is Berrion Berry. Berry is a menstrual health educator, certified integrative health practitioner, and the creator of Optimize Your Flo. She helps modern women have simple and uncomplicated periods. From hormone balancing to cycle syncing to mood enhancing and self-healing, Berrion covers it all and is excited to help you have your best period yet. We got into some really interesting stuff around energy and cycle syncing and using that information about your body and your schedule to create a flow in the way that you approach your life, specifically for people who are entrepreneurs. So I'm really excited to have Berry on the show with me. The conversation was super cool, and I'm very inspired to start looking at the way that I approach my calendar after this conversation. So I know you're going to enjoy it too. Without further ado, here is Berrion Berry. All right, everybody. Well, I am so excited to have with me on the show today, Miss Berry Berry. I love that name. It's such a good brand name. I feel like I'm a little jealous. My last name is terrible for running a business for the personal brand. How are you doing today, Berry?
I am so excited to be here. I'm doing so well. And thank you for liking my name. I didn't like it when I was younger, but now as an adult, I'm like, I appreciate it because you won't forget it. So excited.
I feel it reminds me of that musician, Philip Phillips. Have you ever heard of them before? It's like, at first you're like, that's interesting that they would name them that. And then you're like, oh, that's actually really helpful for a musician. So you were born to be a star, I think. So for our audience that doesn't know you yet, I would love for you to just tell them even just a nutshell version of your story. How did you become so passionate about women's hormones and just the topic of the menstrual cycle?
Yeah. So I'm a menstrual health practitioner, and I never in a million years thought I was going to do this. Like, I thought I was going to go work as a diplomat and work in women's health and women's rights that way. And, life changes as it always does. And I always believe there's purpose in pivoting. And so, I was on my own healing journey in 2019. I had pretty much all around great health, but I was interviewing a friend for my podcast, and she said, periods are not supposed to be painful. And I was like, excuse me? Ma'am, at this point in time, I was a certified personal trainer as well as a functional nutritionist. And she goes, yeah, they're not supposed to be painful. I had never heard that. In the 24 years I'd been on this planet, never once heard that. And in that moment of interviewing her, I knew that that was my community and my people to serve were people who had painful periods. So naturally, being a human guinea pig, as I like to say, I started learning all I could about natural healing as it relates to menstrual cycles and menstrual health. From there, I ate my way to a better period. That's what I love to tell people I did, because that's really where it all started. Come March of 2019, I had pain-free periods, and I have been holding this hot pink torch of pain-free periods and natural everything when it comes to women's health and cycles ever since. Fast forward a few years later, and we are now here.
I love it. And so did you actually have painful periods and they were something that you really had to work on for yourself to get to a place where you were no longer experiencing that?
Yes, like they were the worst thing. So when I was younger in like middle school and high school, I was a really high level athlete. I went on to be a collegiate athlete as well. And what I noticed was my period would come up missing. Like I would have it for about 4 months and it would be the worst thing ever, from the heavy bleeding. Like the amount of times I bled through my pants was, I would say it's embarrassing, but it was normal to me at that time, you know? And then my period would go missing for about 8 months because my hormones were so imbalanced from like the overtraining, the undernourishing, and everything in between. So when I was younger, I had this really toxic relationship with my cycle. Whereas now, you know, in hindsight, things are completely different. I appreciate my cycle. And, you know, I love to say to people, if your period was your lover, what would it say about your relationship? You know, and then I'll walk people through like, oh, were you feeling this? Or, oh, were you feeling that? You know, so I personally did have really painful periods and I did have this really toxic relationship up until the time I was 25 at this point, because February 9th, 2019, I think I was 25. Whereas now my period is basically my best friend along with the rest of my menstrual cycle. So yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that concept of your period being your best friend, because I feel like I think most people that would be listening to this show know that periods are not supposed to be horrific, right? Like they get the concept of it not being something that knocks you out for a week. To say that your period is your best friend seems like almost the opposite end of the spectrum. So I'd love to hear more from you. Why do you say that? And not just my period is tolerable as a different way of explaining it.
We have relationships with literally everything in our life, you know, and I think that the relationships that we have with our body are really the most important. And I guess for me, I had spent most of my life hating everything I thought it meant to be a woman, especially my period. Like that was the one thing I was just like, if I could just never have a period, I would be so happy. And I feel like so many people can relate to that. But then as I began to understand and really accept, you know, myself and my relationship with my body, but even on a deeper level, my relationship with my menstrual cycle and how the menstrual cycle is this blueprint, I began to appreciate my period. And like, I should really say my menstrual cycle is my best friend, but I say my period is my best friend because that is a sign for me to slow down and like kind of take care of myself every month. And I feel like I personally used to go, 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 go. And I think so many other people can relate to that. So, you know, once a month, every month, your period is a reminder to slow down and fill your cup up because no one can pour from that empty cup. So that's why I say it's my best friend. Also, it tells you a lot about your overall health. Like if you can read your own blood and know what that means, you're in good hands too, because sometimes we can even look at blood color, for instance, and it can be a precursor to other conditions if it's a certain color and things like that. So, you know, there's the more wellness-based side and mindful-based side, but then there's also like that like nitty-gritty biology of it where it's like, okay, I know what's going on. So I think that's really empowering ultimately.
Yeah, I feel like there's kind of the area of menstrual health where you're looking at identifying problems, like you said, like, oh, if it looks like this, or if it's, these are the symptoms you're having, this can be a sign of XYZ, right? And I think a lot of people are very familiar with that concept. I know that this is something that you're passionate about, and we'll talk about this in a lot more detail. There's also that side of it where it's more related to almost performance, I guess, if we want to use that phrase, where women, if we can get on board with our cycle and really know our cycle and all of that, that it can actually allow us to operate at our full potential. So it's interesting because I feel like it's kind of two sides of the same coin where on one hand, yeah, like understanding your cycle, tracking your cycle can be used to find out when things are going wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Like if there's an actual serious issue. And it can also be used to really enhance your overall experience of life, which is interesting. I feel like a lot of times people aren't really aware of that side of cycle awareness or cycle understanding.
Yeah, I love to tell people like I redefine periods, right? Because I'm taking biology and like practicality and helping people create like a completely new menstrual reality. How many times have I said that? Can you tell? But that's really what it is that I do, because we take these like more biology-based concepts and make it practical for people to understand. Because I remember what it was like to deal with like white coat syndrome and be like, why is this happening? And then this was the only alternative or option I was provided, or something I didn't want to put in my body. So I like to encourage people to take what we know about our hormones, or at the basic level about our hormones, and then combine it with our actual lifestyle to help, with performance or just really quality of life. Ultimately, I think that that's so much more beneficial for modern people today, as opposed to once a month, every month, hate your body and feel like a potato. I mean, I'm down for feeling like a potato. We all need those days. But at the end of the day, no one wants to hate their body. So rather than sticking with the same narrative of inconvenience when it comes to your period, let's try to be empowered when it comes to our period.
Mm-hmm. And I would love to talk a little bit in the context of entrepreneurship, because a lot of our listeners are business owners, whether they're a nutritionist or some other kind of health professional, or just an entrepreneur who's looking to get healthier. Mm-hmm. And just that concept of being able to build your life and your routine around your menstrual cycle. And before we started recording, Barry and I were talking about being able to kind of plan your calendar around your period. And I was saying, I haven't really been able to do that because my cycle will kind of vary a couple days here and there, which it's not the end of the world. It's not like it's like, 2 weeks off and all of that. But even if it's a couple of days, it's hard for me to get that timing on my calendar where I'm like, I know when it's going to be. So Barry said she could help with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to use your cycle to build your routine and to figure out like, how do you actually have a calendar, have a lifestyle that is applicable to your cycle. Because for me, my cycle's like pretty manageable. Like it's not bad. It's not like I'll have once in a while a little bit of an off month here and there, but usually I feel pretty good to just function as normal when I'm on my period. So for me, it's kind of been less of a motivator to take time off or to rest or anything like that, which on one hand, it's great that I don't have the problems, but on the other hand, it's like, well, but it's an opportunity to slow down a little, which I usually do not take as many of those opportunities as I should. So I'd love to hear from you for people like me who don't necessarily have serious like problems with their period. What would you suggest if we're interested in learning to work around our cycle when it comes to things like our business or our work life, whatever we're doing to pursue the things that are important to us?
So the number one tip is always utilizing your menstrual cycle as a blueprint to align your workflow with your energy flow. So there's 4 phases to the menstrual cycle. And at this point in time, I'm going to walk through it because this might be people's first time hearing it. But, when you're thinking of aligning your workflow with your energy flow, you have to be mindful of that, aligning the two, because there are these ebbs and flows. Second thing I always recommend to people, put your period on your calendar. I don't care how much your cycle might fluctuate, put it on your calendar at this point in time. If you're listening to this podcast episode, you've probably had more than 2 periods, so it's a little bit easier to kind of track and just be familiar with. And then the third thing I recommend is aligning your Google Calendar with said workflow and energy flow. So to get really micro about things, the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle are menstruation. That's your first phase. This is when you're on your period, your energy levels and hormone levels are generally the lowest. Well, when it comes to your business, this is a perfect time for ideation. And that's because there's 25% more connectivity between the right and left hemispheres of your brain. So even if you're like a goal getter, right? Like you like to do all of the things, I always say for like my Enneagram 2s and my Enneagram 3 specifically, I know scaling back, doing a lot of work might feel, overwhelming, but it's actually perfect during this time to get really clear on a vision or get really clear on a goal and take advantage of our brain chemistry. The second phase of your cycle is the follicular phase. So this is post-period, but pre-ovulation. Your hormone levels are actually on the rise. So we want our workflow levels to be on the rise. Optimal time for creation and strategic planning. At the end of the day, you want to know what the vision is, but like, how are we getting to this outcome, right? Okay, this is our goal, but how are we getting there? So we outline that during the follicular phase, whether it's, launch planning, content planning, whatever it is, do the nitty gritty stuff. Then during the third phase of your cycle, post period, post follicular phase, this is our ovulatory phase, right? This is our fertile window. Well, there is a surge in your hormones, specifically estrogen and testosterone during this time. So let's capitalize on this surge in energy and execute and communicate. During this part of our cycle, our hippocampus and our amygdalas are actually larger. So our verbal communication skills and our memories are better. And I'm always just like, listen, don't talk to people any other time except for this time, especially if you're an introvert. This is your moment to really thrive and to really shine. Again, we have this energy surge. So let's capitalize and truly execute during this time, make that vision come to life, launch that book or whatever it is you're up to. And then you're going to turn it down again during your luteal phase, which is the fourth phase of your cycle, also known as PMS. Personally, I call it personal mystery solved, because once you know you're PMS and you're like, oh, that's why I reacted that way, right? But as an entrepreneur, I always say, this is a great time for evaluation and analysis. And the reason you want to do this is because there's a dip in your estrogen and an increase in progesterone. Well, when there's a dip in your estrogen levels, sometimes there's a dip in your serotonin levels. So maybe, you're dealing with a little bit of imposter syndrome or different things like that. This is a perfect time to really evaluate, the business side of things, the numbers. This is when I do all of my finance, everything. When I look at all the analytics from social media, I do it during this time, but this is also a really good time for me to check in with myself as an entrepreneur and say, hey, how am I feeling about my performance? What are my wins from the month? What are my wins from the week? And kind of give myself a pep talk, do a little bit of self-coaching. So that is how I like to recommend people utilize their menstrual cycle for entrepreneurship, but more specifically for performance. And I promise if we need to get more micro, we totally can, but that's just a little overview.
The explanation of the different hormones and the biochemical changes that happen. Because I think sometimes people have this assumption about this kind of topic as being very woo-woo and just out there. But if you actually look at the research and the science behind it, it all makes sense. And it is something that it's really happening. It's not just this kind of spiritual kind of experience. I mean, it can be obviously, but I think sometimes people really want to know the science behind the recommendations. So knowing that their brain chemistry is changing, knowing that their hormone state actually affects their energy, affects their motivation, affects how they're showing up, if they're going to be as extroverted that day. I think it's really interesting. Now, I can imagine if people are similar to me, the challenge may be coming in where they're saying, well, what if I don't know exactly when that stuff is going to be happening? For example, if I have a super stressful month, sometimes my period will be 3 to 5 days late, and then it kind of shifts the whole calendar. So what are your recommendations for somebody who doesn't necessarily have that perfect 28 day on the dot every single month kind of schedule?
Be flexible. So I don't have a 28-day cycle. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that everyone's cycle should be 28 days. But really what it is a normal menstrual cycle in length can range anywhere from 21 days upwards to 34 days. If it's shorter than 21 days, if it's only 20 days, that's abnormal. If it's 35 days, it's abnormal. But if you fall in this window of 21 to 34, you're good. You're golden. And for me personally, I've noticed I've fluctuated so much over the past few months, just adjusting to lifestyle changes and, workloads and different things like that. My number one recommendation is to utilize this loosely. And remember, there's going to be 2 phases of high energy and 2 phases of low energy. And depending on how large, your team might be, it may be super easy for you to implement, harsher boundaries and more strict ones, or it may be really, really difficult. I know when I'm initially onboarding someone onto my team, it doesn't matter to me where I'm at in my cycle. I'm just we got to get it done. This person needs to know I do not have time to stop, but I do have time to press pause just for a moment, check in with myself. And then it's okay, let's pick up the torch. And I also like to remind people that regardless of which phase you're in, there's still a job to get done. There's still a goal and a vision, right? So I get so micro as to planning my days and kind of batching my days within whichever phase I'm in. So regardless if I'm in my ovulatory phase, there's still going to be times where I'm doing more internal work in my business as opposed to external work showing up from my community. Or if I'm on my period, for instance, I still might have to show up regardless of, where I'm at. There's still times where you still have to work. And so to be really realistic with you, we're going to do that. We're going to show up and serve our community. Now, that might be the main thing on the to-do list that day is showing up and serving the community, giving all of the energy there. And then the rest of the day might just be in my inbox or, making sure I have everything for the next time I need to show up. It just really depends. But I think that the more you utilize this as a tool for understanding your own energy and honoring it, and less as like chains, the better off you'll be.
Yeah. And I think for me, something that I've done, and this isn't necessarily so much cycle focused, but it's kind of that more general, like cyclical nature of women, like needing those kind of ebbs and flows. In my calendar, I have the last 2 days of every month blocked off from any sort of appointments. And then the first week of every quarter blocked off. Now, sometimes those weeks I actually take an actual vacation. It's funny, our September block, my husband and I are having our first international vacation since COVID. So we're excited about that. But it's something where I actually went ahead in the beginning of the year and blocked those weeks off so that there were no appointments booked. There were no calls or workshops or anything being scheduled. I don't know about you, but for me, we can sometimes book the calendar out so far in advance that it's almost like now I have no flexibility around my biology. And that might be something that could maybe need to change next year. But I just think even going in and booking those weeks and those last couple of days of the month was with the intention that I wanted to have some downtime, some space. So for those of us who sometimes do get a very booked out calendar, is there any recommendations or tips that you would have where, again, it's like you can't do it perfectly, but you don't have, I don't know what my period's going to be doing in October, but we still have stuff booked out at that point.
Yeah. So I think that it's kind of appreciating my life philosophy. I'm going to share this with you guys. It's flow. Flow is a state of mind. It's something our body naturally does. And it's a way that we can live our life. And I find that so often we are so regimented and so scheduled, but the things that matter most to us, we don't prioritize always. So if you make rest and recovery a priority, you'll figure out when to put it on your calendar at the end of the day. For me personally, I normally, as we are recording this should be one of my mini vacation days because my period's going to be starting either today or tomorrow, right? But we booked this so far in advance. I didn't know where my cycle was going to land. Hey, that's totally fine. At the top of, before we started recording, I was like, yeah, after this, I'm done for the day. Why is that? Because I have that control and that autonomy. And so I think that even in, maybe booking your calendar far out in advance, still kind of bearing in mind, I do need to take a moment. All right, I'm noticing that my period might fall during this time. What can I rearrange if possible? How far in advance can I plan? Because if it's just content, that's easy to plan in advance. I feel like content's always super easy to batch create and get out of the way. But if it's serving your clients, well, maybe you can cluster your client days together like I do. So I'm only serving my clients on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. But because my cycle usually will fall on the weekend or on a Monday, I'm not showing up for my clients because I don't necessarily have the energetic capacity to hold space the way that I want to. So it's kind of learning this dance, if you will, with your schedule and being okay. Even if you do need to show up for a client on a day your period starting, hey, no problem. I can do that. I'm going to give it my all. And then again, turning it off. So, I feel like I'm being redundant at this point with how I'm answering it, but I really do think that flowing with what you're feeling and what's in alignment with you, and then maybe reevaluating. So if you're already planning for Q4, right? We already know what Q4 is going to look like for you. Great. Well, did you go in and put in those 3 mini vacation days? And when I say vacation days, I don't want you guys to think I'm saying like full out vacation. I mean, like just scaling back the workload and saying, you know what, I've noticed my periods falling on the fourth Wednesday of every month. There's a chance that, you know, it could fall on the fourth Wednesday. So if it does, let me mark off the fourth Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, just in case, to give myself a little bit of buffer time and like that moment, like kind of accounting for it without being super overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. Well, because I imagine what you could do is if you block these days out well in advance, you can always come back and remove those blocks, right? Like if it doesn't end up being something that you need, or, you know, if you're realizing, oh, this wasn't really the actual timing that I thought it was going to be, it's not like your calendar is set in stone. If you blocked a day off, you could open that day up for appointments, that kind of thing. And I do feel like for me, and this is something I teach my clients when it comes to creating their workflow or how they're actually going to approach the week, is I really teach max 3 days, like what you're saying for one-on-one clients. Because at least if you have 2 full days where you don't have appointments booked, you can be more flexible on those days. And that doesn't mean those days are necessarily, like you said, vacation days. It could just be like you block the day off to work on projects. Like I have a recurring, usually it's Tuesdays, recurring calendar block Tuesday mornings to just work on a project. And it's really open to what the project is going to be that day, or, you know, what are we promoting in our business this quarter? So do I need to work on that? So it's like giving me that block of time that is flexible. So if I was on my period, in theory, I could say, I don't really feel like working today. I'm going to just chill. But it's there so that I can kind of use what energy I have, or use that time to work on what's important for that month or that week, and not feel like every single day has to be this like energetically showing up for clients. Because I'm a dietitian. A lot of my clients are dietitians, but nutritionists in general, a lot of times they think they have to let their clients build their calendar. And they're just like shoving all these appointments everywhere. And I'm like, how do you even function like that? Let alone like dealing with your menstrual cycle? Like, how do you actually show up and have the energy that you need to pour into somebody when your calendar is like a hot mess? I don't know if you've talked to any of your clients about that.
Okay, I'm going to tell you how my calendar is scheduled and structured, because I feel like anybody listening will benefit from this. And it's because the idea of syncing your life and business with your cycle sounds great, and like people want to know how to do it. So we're about to get into it, because I think this is it's just natural. So Sundays are my ideation days. That's what I say. So regardless of which phase of my cycle I'm in, Sundays are really my big picture, zoom out days, really looking at brainstorming what needs to be done and planning for the week ahead. That is what I do on Sunday. Ideation, all my ideas, why are words so hard, but all of the ideas on Sundays and Sundays alone. Mondays are my creation days. So these are the days that are really related to strategic planning. And I find myself doing a lot of podcast interviews with people, doing a lot of admin meetings with my teams, any check-ins for projects and stuff like that, because I feel like Mondays are the days we put out the fires from like what happened over the weekend. So that's what I do on Monday. Tuesday are really going to be client and community days. That's what I do on Tuesdays. And I do a bit of like content creation on those days. And it's because I've already planned that I'm going to get up, get dressed, be golden, like, hey, what's up on Instagram, checking in with my community there, nurturing them, but also pouring into my clients, into my students. Wednesdays, I like to utilize sometimes, depending on like what season of business I'm in and what the focus is either going to be an evaluation day where I'm really focusing on the project and like how far I've gotten things done, or it might not be. It just kind of depends, but I like using Wednesdays as really a project assessment day. Thursdays are kind of my loose end days if there's still projects I need to work on, but also this is when I serve my client and my community. It's also a day I've noticed I show up on Instagram a lot, and that's because I'm ready for the weekend. Fridays and Saturdays. Fridays are for all things related to anything in the business that I've just been prolonging, because sometimes I like to procrastinate. I don't know why. I think
I'm sure nobody understands what that feels like.
And then Saturdays are really going to be my personal development days because I think that personal development as a business owner is really important. So again, Sunday, we're doing ideation. Monday, we're doing creation. Tuesday, we're doing execution. Wednesday, we're doing evaluation. If I need an additional day to do any execution related things, I'll do that on Thursdays. And then Friday and Saturday, that's kind of my weekend personally. Now, I know not everybody's schedule is going to look like that because most people don't want to be working on a Friday or on a Saturday or a Sunday, but I personally like that. And I found that, that structure works really well for my business structure and plan, but also for my cycle. So that way I'm not doing the most all week, just on really 2 days. And then the other 3 to 4 days, I'm just kind of hanging out.
It's so interesting. This is one of the reasons why I love entrepreneurship, because I feel like that kind of schedule is something that I don't know if there are real quote unquote jobs that would allow you to have that kind of schedule. Maybe there are. I've honestly never really had a real job, so I can't really speak to it. But what I was going to say is just that ability to create what works for you and the days that work for you and the exact activities that work for you. I feel like that's what I love about entrepreneurship so much. And I really feel like for women especially, the normal way that the world operates with schedules and work days and everything really isn't designed for women, pretty much designed by men for men, which, it doesn't mean that they're doing it on purpose. They just don't know any better as far as what would work better for women. And so that's one of the things I'm super passionate about with just entrepreneurship in general, is helping women create businesses that allow them to work like that. Because I don't think that that's sadly the way that most people that have jobs, I don't think most people get to operate like that, where they get to really theme their days and have a very specific flow to their work week.
I would agree with that. I couldn't echo that anymore if I wanted to, honestly, because we do live in this world that is very linear, and it is, how men work. And we as women, if we look at history, women got into the workforce a little bit later than men. And so we fall into that rhythm. But entrepreneurship is this beautiful thing where you can create your own rhythm, your own routine. And I always tell people, I'm setting the mood. That's what I call it when I'm Sundays are my set the mood, because that way I can kind of figure out what my energy is going to be like and then structure that workflow, right, with my energy flow. And then from there, when I want to be a little bit more strategic, I can look at where I'm at in my cycle, which I always know where I'm at because I'm just one of those people. I practice what I preach. But I can also look at my Google Calendar and see if I want to move things around based off of how I'm feeling. And I do also like to say, feelings are not facts. We love feelings. We love to honor them. But then there's some people who get super woo-woo-y and oh, this is how I feel. And then they don't know why they can't get things done. So if you're one of those people, no shade, no tea, I'm with you. I feel that, but also discipline with your flow will help a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's, with the way that the masculine energy and our society is set up, where it's you got your to-do list, you have your 8 or 9 hour workday. It's 8 to 5 or something. And, that's the way that you're working, and all of that being so structured. When you get into entrepreneurship, I think so many people are afraid that well, if I don't have the structure, how am I going to know what to work on and that kind of thing. And I think, like you said before, it's kind of embracing the fact that you can be very fluid, and also creating those containers for, when are you going to work on stuff, and kind of giving yourself the time to do the tasks that need to get done, but also not just I don't know. I feel like a lot of people will just work because they feel like they should be doing something, if that makes sense. It's oh, well, I got to work from 9 to 5 today. So even if I don't really have anything super important to do, I'll figure out something to, tinker with for the next hour, rather than saying, okay, did I get my most important thing done for the day? Great, I'm done. I could work for the rest of the afternoon if I have something important or exciting to work on. But if I don't, maybe I'm done for the day, and that's totally okay. And I feel like so many people, especially women, I don't know why it's such a hard thing for women to let go of, but they just feel oh, well, if I can work, I should be working, rather than being strategic about, did I get done what needed to get done? If yes, then what's the value of continuing to work today if I don't really have to?
I find myself dealing with this all the time, like, because I'm so used to, I did work in corporate America for a while. And so I'm so used to always having to perform and produce during 9 to 5. Now life is so different because even when I find myself thinking those things, I say, hold on a second. What kind of life did you want? Remind yourself of that. Okay, so you don't feel like creating right now. That's probably a sign that you shouldn't create, because whatever comes out of this forced creation is not going to be good. Like, don't do it. No one's going to benefit from like a bad graphic on Instagram or a bad caption or something like that. People are not going to benefit from that. I think that entrepreneurship really encourages us to be more purposeful and intentional with how we're serving our communities or making our impact. And so the more we can remember that and give ourselves that permission, like, hey, I know business hours say, like, for me, my business hours are 10 to 5, and people get so annoyed. They're like, what am I supposed to do with that? I don't care. Figure it out. Like, that's kind of how I feel. But, Enneagram 8 over here. So it doesn't matter to me how people figure it out. It's just more so I need a deep time for creation for myself so that I feel really good. And then I also need time to really serve my community. So if you can fall within my business hours, great. But if you can't, I'm actually okay with that too. We'll figure something else out. And I think that if we could all get into this place of saying, like, hey, this is my boundary, either get with it or just like keep it pushing, we're a lot happier. But, like you said, we're so used to that masculine energy, that masculine work way, just flow. Like, that is what our menstrual cycle is a reminder to do. That's why I say flow is a state of mind. It's what our body does and how we can live our life. How we choose to flow is entirely up to us. But, it can be as rigid or as structured as you want. Ultimately, it's just on you.
Mm-hmm. So this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but you said something a few minutes ago about if you don't feel like creating and you're not feeling very creative, then it's okay to just be like, I'm not doing that right now because it's not going to necessarily be my best work. What would you say to somebody, because this is something I run into a lot with my clients, where there is that issue of fear being what's stopping them from feeling creative. They're like comparing themselves to other people. They're saying my stuff's not good enough, like that kind of mindset, where if you just said, oh, you don't feel like creating today, don't create, they would probably never create anything. Mm-hmm. So where is the balance between saying, okay, sometimes you just have to get over the hump of like learning how to do something? Like, I always think about podcasting. I was so nervous when we started podcasting. This was like 6 years ago that we started, 7. Gosh, actually, no. Now that I think about it, I think 8 years ago is when we launched our first podcast. Long time ago. When we first started, I was super nervous about that. And it was something that I probably wasn't feeling like just so excited to go on and start talking. I was actually really scared. And if I had let that fear get in the way, I might have never actually done anything, because it's like, well, I'm not feeling super inspired, or I'm not feeling like I'm like just bursting with creativity. So I'm just going to not do it. So all of that to say, what would you say to somebody who feels like they are afraid to put themselves out there versus it being like, oh, this isn't just the best day for me to be, creating my best work?
I think, oh gosh, this is about to be real masculine, but it's the truth anyhow. I think people need to hear it. So first and foremost, it's taking radical responsibility. You should know the difference. If you're an entrepreneur, you should know the difference between faith and fear at this point. If you have a dream, it needs to be fueled by your faith. And if you're allowing your fear to hold you back, here's what I have to say to you. Stop looking around and start looking forward. It's the truth people don't want to hear, but the truth everybody needs to know. If you have so much time to consume someone else's content and say, oh, this person's doing that and this person's doing that and I'm not doing it, you're looking the wrong way, baby. You got to be looking forward. Stop looking around and start looking forward. Because when you look at what everybody else is doing, 2 things generally happen. One, you do feel afraid. You're like, I'm not performing at that level. And you feel kind of bad about yourself. Or 2, you start creating what everybody else is creating. That's not the selling point in any industry, is to create what everybody else is doing. So,
Yeah.
you have to be fueled by your faith and really moving forward on your goal, your mission, whatever it is, but also stop looking around, even in moments where like I have something on my computer that says, stop looking around and start looking forward. Because even I have my moments. I think we all do, And then the last thing is remember that excellence is a habit. I think that a lot of times people think excellence is this act or like it's this thing that you put on. But, when I say, hey, I don't feel like creating today, it's not because I really don't want to create. It's because I am in a habit of excellence and producing the best quality that I can give, because quality will beat quantity every time. I know everybody says be consistent, post every single day. I mean, I'll let everybody say what they want to say. I have my own thoughts on that. But I think that when you show up with purpose and with intention. And it's so important to show up with excellence, because that's what's separating you from the competition, not I posted every single day on Instagram and I got lost in the hashtags and the reels and no. Stop looking around, start looking forward and get it done.
Well, and I wonder if there's a little bit of this period of time when somebody's first starting a business where they have to kind of be okay with things not being great. Like, it's like you can't develop that unconscious competence, as it's called, where it's like you can just go and show up and do something and it be good without having some failure under your belt. So it's kind of this, I almost feel like it's this balance of like, not just posting to post and just putting some, something out there that you're like, this isn't going to help anybody. Like, I think always having the mindset of like, I want to help somebody. And if even just one person is helped by this content, it's valuable. But on the other hand, just being okay with the idea of practicing, like you said, the excellence being a habit. When you first start a business, you first start posting or you first start putting content out there, it's probably not going to be that great. Like in a lot of cases, it's probably just going to be pretty mediocre. But I really love what you're saying about not looking around and comparing yourself and like saying, well, my stuff's not as good as them. Or if I want to be successful, I got to like do what they're doing. Cause I think, like you said, it's either going to cause serious imposter syndrome and make you just like totally shrivel up and like not want to post anything, or you're going to end up posting stuff that's just copying somebody else, and not like in a plagiarism way, but even just like subconsciously imitating what somebody else is doing. And like you said, that's not going to grow an effective business if you're just like a secondhand copy of somebody else's stuff, right? So it's like, I really think that's really important advice, because I have a lot of clients that can get very overwhelmed by seeing what other people are doing online. And in some cases, I'm literally like, you just got to mute them. Like, maybe you don't have to unfollow them if you're friends, but you just got to mute them on Instagram so you do not see their posts. You're not getting influenced to like change what you're going to do or say my stuff's not good enough. And, it's, I feel like that comparison thing, I don't know if it's like worse for women than it is for men, but I have so many clients that they just get paralyzed by this, like, I'm not as good as them, so I might as well not do anything.
I think that, oh gosh, we could talk about this for forever, honestly. But, one of the things that I've noticed, because I have slowly become one of those people that people look to for inspiration. And I see people copy me all of the time. I have people send me posts and I'm like, oh no, not again, and then I have to realize that that's a reminder for me that I'm doing something right. But also, what can I say to other people who are just starting out? So if I was somebody just starting out in business right now, my number one recommendation is to say, hey, this is who I am, and realize this is all practice right now. Especially like if you're in that 0 to 6 months mark of your business, it's all practice right now. Make sure that you are progressing forward. I don't want to say progress over perfection or anything like that. Perfection's not even a topic of discussion for me. Progress, because that first 6 months is it's a psychological thing. All of entrepreneurship is a mindset thing, in my opinion. But when you're first starting out, you're trying to figure out who you are, where you're at. You're floating around. You're like, is this my niche? Is that my niche? Just pause and like turn down the volume of the outside world and turn up the volume of your internal world. And I think that's why women, when it comes to social media or just life in general, we do struggle with comparison, because we've been kind of conditioned to trust everybody else over ourselves. Whereas like, men, not necessarily the same thing. I can think about like I have 3 older brothers, and they were taught, like, if you fall, you just get back up and you shake it off. Whereas for me, it was like, you're going to sit here. Even if you want to play, do not fall over. Like, it was this, they were taught to trust themselves more, where I was taught to second guess myself. And now I'm just kind of like, I feel like I want to make this investment today, so I'm going to do it, like, so
Yeah.
it's learning to trust yourself. And you have to, especially that first 6 months, yes, have your coach, have your mentor. Absolutely. But also know the difference between, somebody who's teaching you to think for yourself and build something sustainable, and somebody who's just teaching you how to do what they did. Like, there's a very fine line. And I'm saying that because I've seen a lot of things where I'm like, this person is an exact replica of their mentor. And I don't think that's what they were trying to be. And then their mentor complains about it. It's like, no. Remember who you are. Remember what your vision is. Turn down their volume, turn yours up, and you should be good. But again, that's just, my rough around the edges take on things. Not a business coach, though.
I love it. And just as a business coach, it's something I see so often where people, and I get it because, first of all, we all have that like school mindset where we're just like, give me the assignment and I'll do the assignment, I'll get the A kind of thing. And so I get in a situation where a lot of my clients, they want to be told exactly what to do. And like I said, I totally get it. It's a lot easier if you have this like very specific plan that somebody else has written for you. But it's something where I don't even think you can become successful if somebody else is writing the plan for you, right? Like, I think it's a good starting point. Like you said, the first 6 months to a year, getting off the ground, getting some education on how to do things, getting ideas about how to do things, and learning the actual like steps and execution that you need to do. Because a lot of times you don't even know where to start when you're first getting started, and it helps to learn from somebody who's done it. But I do find that once you've kind of gotten things off the ground, there needs to be a lot of like self-direction that happens. And I actually find that to be one of the hardest parts of entrepreneurship, is being okay with taking actions that were not told to you, or being able to figure out what is the best next step for my business. Because as somebody who's worked with a lot of mentors, I have coaches, I really love my coaches. They're great. They're so helpful, but I definitely see myself sometimes starting to like imitate too much, because it's just easy, right? It's so much easier to say like, well, if it's working for them, I'm going to do that too. And so for me, it's a lot of times kind of taking a step back and saying like, yeah, like what they do works, but it probably works because they're doing it, not because that is the only way to do something, right? So I think being able to really get clear on what your vision is and know like, how do you want to run your business, and what's your business goal? And like one of my coaches is always saying to me, you don't want my business. Like, that's not what you're trying to build. You don't want to build my business. You need to be building your business. And that needs to look very unique to you and what your gifts are and your interests and your goals and your desires and all of that. And so I find once people have the foundations of like, what are the basic operational necessities of a business, once they know that, then it's kind of opens up to this, like, now you get to decide where you're going to go with this. And that can honestly be one of the scariest parts for people, is like, oh no, nobody's telling me exactly what to do anymore. And now I feel like I don't know where to go. And I think there is a lot of fear that can come up. And especially if we were taught not to take risks, and if we were taught to like play it safe and follow the rules and all of that, it's very difficult, not impossible. Obviously, a lot of mindset work can help overcome that, but it can be difficult to say, I do trust myself and I trust my decisions. And it doesn't mean they're going to work all the time, but I can trust my ability to make those decisions and to try new things and to be experimental and, listen to my gut, as opposed to saying, I just need this like 10-step plan to follow from somebody else who is smarter than me or something like that.
I mean, gosh, I feel like we're just like going down this rabbit hole and I'm like obsessed with it. But I think one of the most important things I learned early on is someone else's framework can work, but I can also always change the frame. So that is something that I always encourage people, especially because I say the menstrual cycle is a blueprint ultimately, right? We have 2 weeks of high energy, 2 weeks of low energy, but we've just talked about different ways to actually utilize the framework of our menstrual cycle to achieve a goal. So it doesn't matter where you're at in your entrepreneurial journey, whether or not you have a mentor or a coach or whatever it is, they have their way of doing it, but you have your own way of doing it too. So adjust, modify, adapt, pivot, change, tweak things the way that you want. Like, I can't tell you how many people told me I needed to do discovery calls. I hated doing discovery calls. I was good at them. I just didn't like doing them. So guess what I started doing instead of discovery calls? Instagram stories. I'm pretty much on my Instagram story every single day, pointing out one pain point of my client, giving them an explanation of why that's their pain point, and then providing a solution. My program, whichever one I'm selling at the point in time. Why? Because it worked for me. Now, my mentor, she could not do Instagram stories. She does not like Instagram. She hates being on camera. Me, I'm like, listen up. I don't want to be on the phone. Let's talk right here. 15 seconds. Let's do it. So I think that acknowledging and admiring someone else's framework and then tweaking it for yours is ultimately what happens and helps so much in entrepreneurship. I mean, there's so much I feel like I should tell early entrepreneurs, and I'm like, but I'm still in the beta stages myself. But yeah.
Well, I feel like sometimes you learn more from people who are at a similar level as you than somebody who's like way ahead of you. I mean, one of my coaches, their business brings in over $10 million a year in revenue, which is super inspiring and amazing. Whether or not that's actually a goal of mine, like maybe not. I think about that. I'm like, is that really what I would want? I don't even know if I care about that kind of outcome. But it's funny because when you see the way that their business operates, it's almost like they're so far ahead that you need like a stepping stone to say, okay, what would be the next step? Because if I try to go from where I am to where they are, it's just going to be this like freaking like crazy leap that I'll probably fall off the cliff kind of thing. So I think sometimes you can actually learn a lot from people who are just a little bit ahead of you, because it's like, oh, you're just that next step, or like you're 2 steps ahead of me as opposed to like 30 steps ahead of me. So I think talking about like, how do you get off the ground? Because I found getting up to like your first 6 figures in business, for example, is a totally different type of activity and approach and mindset and method than getting to like your first $500,000 or something like that. Like the things that you have to focus on are just so different. So it's just interesting how, certain recommendations work well when you're first starting, but then when you get to a higher level, it's like, oh, that actually doesn't work anymore for me, or, oh, that's not really aligned with what my goals are. So I'm going to change how I'm doing that.
And I think that you said something right there, your goals. Biggest tip, make sure you're dreaming your dream, ladies. Like, at the end of the day, I find myself, I remember not necessarily always dreaming my dream and wanting to accomplish and do things. And then I would do it. And I was like, why did I do this in the first place? So like,
why did I want this?
You kind of want to make sure that you're actually dreaming your dream and setting things up. I never wanted a 4-hour work week. Like, I still haven't read that book. And I looked at my calendar this week and I was like, I think I have 4 hours of work. I am unwell. Like, what am I doing? I would have never imagined that. And no, that wasn't something I dreamed of doing, but it's also something I hear people talk about all of the time. And I'm like, guess that was meant for me without even realizing it. I'll take it, So, obviously you want to be clear on your vision, and sometimes unintentional things can happen, like a 4-hour work week here and there, but also make sure that that's in alignment with you and what your beliefs are, what your values are, and ultimately your mission and impact at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I feel like that relates so well back to what we were talking about earlier with creating your own schedule, where it's like, if you are just working 80 hours a week in your business, like, why did you create a business? You could have just gotten a job and worked that much, right? So I think it's really important to step back and say, are you actually creating the lifestyle that you want to live? Because otherwise, sometimes, speaking from being in business for, gosh, I guess this is year 7 now, year 8, I forget exactly what, but there's no end. Like, you don't get to a place where now I'm done. Now I've accomplished the entrepreneur thing and I get to just like chill. You're always kind of in it. And so if you're creating something that you don't even want, it's kind of, one of my coaches calls it like a golden prison. It's like, yeah, you have all this money coming in, but you're not happy because you've literally created a job for yourself. And now you're working harder than you'd even work if you were employed. So I feel like this whole conversation is great for whether or not somebody's an entrepreneur. If they are, obviously it's something that they definitely should be thinking about so that they do not get into a situation where they're building something that doesn't actually like make them happy or doesn't create the lifestyle that they want to live.
Just be intentional, like that's ultimately what it comes down to. I love being able to tell you, like, this is how you can use your menstrual cycle to be more productive. But ultimately, it's about being intentional with the life that you want to live. And your menstrual cycle is just an easy way to make that happen, in my opinion. Like I can't help but say that because that's what I do, but it's also truly how I live. I appreciate that slowness to life. I appreciate my seasons of high energy and output and my seasons of low energy, low output. So I think that ultimately, if you find out what it is that matters to you, and then you build from there, you're able to accomplish so much more. And I mean, maybe you can get further faster. I don't know. I'm not in a rush anytime for anything right now. So that's just my philosophy though.
I love it. Well, we'll do a little mic drop on that one. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of people who want to connect with you further after listening to this conversation today. Where would people be able to learn more about the work that you do, or how they can learn more about this mindset of being in flow in your life?
Yeah. So the best place to find me, I always say we can do a nice little handshake on Instagram. My Instagram is at Berrion Berry. And then the one for my business is at Optimize Your Flo. And then if you're kind of trying to go on a date with me, that's what I tell people. If you're trying to take me on a date, hang out with me on my podcast. That is called Flow with Berrion Berry. We talk about periods, personal development, and perspective, because I really love all things entrepreneurship and periods, but I like to provide a different perspective on it than what people are used to. And then you can always find me on my website it's www.berrionberry.com, but I don't really do much on there besides like sell my programs and stuff. So if you want to work with me, you can also find that on the Instagrams.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're going to get a bunch of DMs after this episode with people wanting to connect with you and just getting to know you and your philosophy more. Barry, this has been so awesome to get to chat with you about this topic. And I just love getting to kind of go on random rabbit trails with somebody who has I'd say similar. I might be a little bit more type A than you, but I think we have some similar philosophies. Type A. You're like, you don't even know.
I'm so type A. I'm just really chill right now. Periods approaching. But thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks to all of you for hanging out with us for the last 45 minutes or so. And we will look forward to seeing you here next week on the Fed and Fearless podcast. Take care, everybody. Are you a nutritionist or dietitian struggling to figure out how much to charge for your programs and services? Maybe you've heard that as a nutritionist, you should just charge what you're worth. But this way of thinking can cause you to either undercharge your clients or work yourself into the ground trying to earn your worth. As a healthcare provider, you can't set up a pricing structure that forces you to sacrifice your own health and well-being in the name of your business and your clients. But I promise it doesn't have to be this way. When you download my free profit planning workbook, I'll walk you step by step through the 10-step process for determining the right pricing for your nutrition business. As a nutritionist, you have the power to completely change someone's life for the better. There's huge value in that, so it's time to stop underselling what you do. By following along with this worksheet, you can determine exactly what you need to charge to achieve your revenue goals with ease. I'll teach you everything I've learned about pricing from growing my own nutrition business to over $250,000 in revenue annually and helping other dietitian and nutrition entrepreneurs hit their first $10,000 to $30,000 months and beyond. To get your free workbook, go to lauraschoenfeld.com/profit, PROFIT, and grab your copy today, so you no longer have to wonder how to set the right rates for your incredibly valuable nutrition services. That's lauraschoenfeld.com/profit. It's time to make the money that you deserve as a nutritionist, and I can't wait to help you get there.